What awaits us on the other side? This question has been troubling people's minds since time immemorial. Some argue that death is just the beginning, a transition into another reality. The famous shaman Sandra Ingerman suggests looking at this process as a deep transformation, rather than the end of the path. Her teachings claim that awareness of one's own mortality can free one from fear and give life a new meaning. She talks about those who have found healing by facing the inevitable. But can these ideas be considered true? Hardly anyone is able to say exactly what awaits us behind the veil of this mystery. Nevertheless, her words make you think, and the mystery of the unknown arouses curiosity. Watch the video below if you're ready to immerse yourself in the world of mystery and reflections on the eternal. Sandra Ingerman is one of the mysterious personalities of our time, who has devoted her life to the study of spiritual practices. She gained her fame by combining ancient traditions and modern reflections on the search for the meaning of life. Her journey began with university education. Sandra earned a master's degree in counseling and became a licensed family therapist. She used this knowledge to understand how mental health is related to deeper levels of consciousness. Her interest in mysticism was aroused in her youth, when questions of life and death began to occupy all her thoughts. Her numerous books, translated into 16 languages, reveal the secrets of shamanism, making them accessible to millions of readers. Sandra's most famous works include Soul Retrieval, Mending the Fragmented Self, and Medicine for the Earth. These works reveal in detail the complexity of human existence. In her presentations at international seminars, she teaches people to find harmony with nature. For Sandra, reconnecting with Earth is the key to solving global problems. Her philosophy is imbued with a belief in the power of community, capable of changing the world through collective efforts. It's amazing that such complex ideas resonate with a wide variety of people, from skeptics to mystics. In 2007, she was awarded an award for her contribution to integrative medicine, and a few years later, she was included in the list of the most influential spiritual leaders of our time. Her beliefs are based on the idea that death is not the end, but only a transition. Sandra often repeats that the soul continues on its way, leaving the physical world behind. However, it is impossible to assert that shamanism is an absolute truth. However, some statements from this practice will also be useful for those who do not believe in shamanism, but are only interested in the idea of life after death. Let's talk about it. Sandra Ingerman's near-death experience is shrouded in a mystical halo, causing awe, interest, and even fear. After all, who doesn't want to believe that nothing ends after death? That our existence doesn't end, but just takes on another form. It all started when she was struck by lightning as a child. She was only 7 years old at the time, but this event, of course, left a deep imprint on her soul. Still, a lightning strike is not something that is forgotten, even if it happened in childhood. But she hadn't fully realized then that it was a sign pointing to her future as a mediator between worlds. Later, in her youth, Sandra had another near-death experience. She almost drowned during a trip to Mexico. This moment was her second encounter with the boundary between life and death, and once again deeply shocked her. Her mind opened up to images that could not be rationally explained, and so she began to think about a religious or spiritual explanation. The third near-death experience occurred when she was in her early 20s. The car she was in went off a cliff, and it was only a miracle that it did not end in tragedy for both Sandra and the 5 other people who were in the car with her. However, instead of horror, she experienced something extraordinary. Sandra describes this moment as an encounter with a spiritual light that healed her inner wounds. Each of these events had an important lesson. They showed her that there is another level of being beyond physical reality. But her path to shamanism was more than just a series of mystical experiences. It was a sequence of profound transformations that changed her perception of the world. Sandra admits that shamanism came to her not as a ready-made knowledge, but as a path of trial and error. The experience on the verge of life and death taught her to see people not just as bodies, but as the radiance of their souls. Her education did not begin with books, but with observing her own feelings and meeting with spiritual mentors. Lightning, water, and a chasm became symbols of her 3 key passages. Each of them deepened her understanding that death is not the end, but only another round of existence. Sandra claims that these events not only helped her heal herself, but also gave her the strength to help others. Describing her near-death states in detail, Sandra recalls how she was surrounded by blinding light, which, according to her feelings, represented the Divine Father and Mother. This light did not condemn her, it accepted her as a pure essence which itself glows from within. During another near-death experience, she felt like she was part of a huge garden full of incredibly beautiful plants, trees, and bushes. There was music there, unlike anything on Earth, as if created from pure sensations and emotions. At the same moment, Sandra realized that the physical body is just a shell, and the real nature of man lies in its light, in the very inner light that she felt in herself during her first near-death experience, in the light that the divine beings who revealed themselves to her drew attention to. This discovery became the basis for her further spiritual journey. Sandra shares that experiencing near-death experiences has taught her unconditional love and acceptance. She realized that each of us is not just a person, but a spark of divine light. However, her experience was not only inspiring, it also brought difficult lessons. During the difficult times of her life, Sandra did not want to stay on Earth, feeling that the world was full of suffering. However, her spiritual guides helped her understand that choosing to stay here is the path of healing, the right path that she should follow. These events became for her a moment of rethinking and coming out of a severe depressive state. One of the last near-death states really scared her, because before it she felt terrible and even thought about ending her life. This coincidence convinced her that she should always be careful with her desires. After that, Sandra learned to find a balance between light and dark, both in herself and in the world around her. Now she sees life as a constant process of destroying the old and giving birth to the new, where death is only part of a great cycle. This experience became for her not a romantic story, as is often presented in books or films, but a source of strength to overcome pain. Sandra emphasizes that the visions she has experienced cannot be taken as the absolute truth. They became her personal experience, unique and inaccessible to the full understanding of others. However, she believes that nature is the key to understanding death and rebirth. Every leaf that blooms and falls from the tree, every sunrise and sunset remind us that everything goes through a cycle of completion and rebirth. It means to assume that the decline of a person, his physical death, is not a radical end to his existence. Just as a leaf that has fallen from a tree continues to exist as a soil fertilizer, so a dead person exists in a place that we, the living, do not yet notice, but which may well exist. Having lived through the experience described before and comprehending it, Sandra Ingerman sees death not as a conclusion, but as a gateway to a new reality. According to her, death is not a defeat, but a natural step in life. She believes that in the modern world, people have lost their understanding of this process, having lost touch with ancient traditions. Sandra emphasizes that natural cycles teach us the importance of dissolving into the world and rebirth. In nature, nothing disappears without a trace. Everything is recycled into a new form. She applies this principle to the human soul, which, in her opinion, continues to exist after leaving the physical world. For her, death is a moment of deep rebirth, when a person leaves behind everything false and finds his true self. In her teachings, Sandra says that this is not the end of existence, but a transition to a brighter and purer state. She claims that our bodies are just vessels for the spirit, which remains eternal. Sandra notes that the fear of death is often associated with ignorance of its essence. Modern culture has displaced the discussion of this topic, which has led to a distorted perception. She sees a solution in turning to ancient rituals that helped people spend their dying with dignity and accompanied their loved ones in grief. The shaman emphasizes that spiritual practice, based on the belief that there is something else after death, makes it possible to feel connected to the eternal. Without this, a person sees death as only a limb, missing its transformational essence. For Ingerman, it is important that people do not avoid thinking about death, but accept it as part of the path. She believes that in this process one can find inspiration for living in harmony with the world. Nature shows that decay is not destruction, but preparation for a new stage. This can be seen everywhere. A caterpillar goes through the pupal stage to become a butterfly, where its body literally collapses. But a winged creature is born out of this chaos. A forest fire destroys old vegetation, but it also clears space for new shoots, stimulating the growth of young trees and shrubs. Overripe fruits falling to the ground disintegrate and they turn into compost, returning energy to the ecosystem and promoting the growth of new plants. None of this disappears. Moreover, they don't just help the organisms around them, they transform themselves. Sandra claims that humanity is on the verge of a global rebirth. This period, she says, is reminiscent of ancient initiations that required people to give up everything that was not real. She says that we are currently experiencing a collective lesson that opens us up to a new perspective on life. If you need concrete evidence and facts that life after death exists, then it will be very difficult to achieve this. Sandra, for example, believes that personal experience is one of the most convincing proofs of the existence of life after death. However, of course, you should not intentionally put yourself in dangerous situations because of the desire to verify your theory. It is better to pay attention to someone else's experience. For example, as mentioned earlier, Sandra shares her memories of 3 near-death experiences that changed her perception of the world forever. She emphasizes that the feeling of unconditional acceptance and peace she experienced at the moment of her near-death state cannot be explained logically, but it remains with a person forever. Sandra is sure that such experiences provide clues about a spiritual dimension that exists beyond physical reality. In her books and interviews, the shaman also draws attention to cultural traditions that have considered death as an important rite of passage for centuries. She gives examples of rituals in which the deceased were treated with respect, and the process of saying goodbye was perceived as a path to the rebirth of the soul. In her teachings, death is not a loss, but a transformation that allows us to reveal new facets of being. Sandra is convinced that a person's intention can influence their path even after passing away. She emphasizes the importance of creating a positive attitude and connecting with spiritual guides who help prepare for this moment. Her words are addressed to those who are afraid of the unknown. She urges not to close oneself off from the inevitable, but to look for opportunities for inner growth in it. Ingerman believes that nature also provides us with the keys to understanding the afterlife. She points to the cycles of death and rebirth that can be observed in the changing seasons, plant growth, and ecosystem renewal. From her point of view, these phenomena show that the disintegration is not a loss, but the beginning of a new stage. Sandra appeals to those who are skeptical of her conclusions, emphasizing that this is not a dogma, but her personal path of knowledge. She encourages people to seek their own answers, not relying solely on her words or on the beliefs of others. Her teachings inspire the search for harmony, which helps to accept death as a natural process. So what does the curtain between life and death hide? This question still remains without a specific answer, but the indirect evidence sounds quite convincing, especially for those who want and can believe it. Sandra Ingerman's experience makes it possible to look at death as an inevitable stage rather than the end of the path. Her stories about near-death experiences do not prove, but hint at the existence of another reality. Shaman's spiritual practices inspire reflection, forcing us to rethink our own fears of the unknown. The idea of continuing to exist outside the physical world is of great interest to many, and even gives comfort. Nature, its cycles and rebirth implicitly, as if in a whisper, confirm the possibility of life after death. And although there is no definitive truth, and it is impossible to imagine whether it will ever be proven, the mystery of the eternal continues to attract and inspire humanity to spiritual searches. Dear friends, thank you for watching my video to the end. If you liked it, please like it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's very important. Thank you, and have a nice day.